Today I'm answering the most asked question in the Hearts of Iron 4 community, and that is, how do I control the Navy in Hearts of Iron 4, and how do I make it as easy to control as before Man the Guns? This is not going to be a video showing the full naval system itself, but instead it's going to be mostly shortcuts on how to avoid penalties assigned to your ships, how to be able to know where to send your ships, and even things like how to stop your Navy from getting port striked ever again, and how to set up the Navy so it's a lot easier for you to be able to tell what's what and keep track of everything. So if that's the kind of stuff you're looking for, you've come to the right place. Now, the very first thing you're going to do, whether you're in single player, multiplayer, Germany, America, Japan, whatever country or mode you're playing in, you're going to do the exact same thing. You're going to send your entire naval task force, all of them, to a single specific port. Now, the reason you do this is that way you can design task forces later on with the ships you already have, making it a lot easier for you to know what you want to do. There's actually a few ways of doing this. First off, which is probably the most easiest way if you're Germany, just simply select one of these groups. We'll just click these 4 destroyers, for example. Hold shift, and then you're going to select all of the groups by dragging, and then you're going to hit control. While holding it down, you're going to right click over the port, and that sends them to that port. Now, the next way you can do this is if, say for example, you like the old system, you could press P on your keyboard and start selecting ships by holding shift down, and then just select as many as you want, or all of them preferably. Hold down control and right click the port. The other way you can do this is by pressing F2 on your keyboard, or if you don't have a keyboard, for example, if you're on a laptop that doesn't have F2, you can just click the anchor down here, and you'll have access to this system up here. You can then usually just shift, and start selecting all the groups inside this menu, just like that. Hold down left control and right click the port, and that sends them all to the same place. Now, the final way you could do this, which is sometimes easier, while you're in this mode, just click the port or the fleet that's already assigned to the port you want to send everything to. Now, whenever you do that, it highlights the one up top that's already there. You can then just select all of the fleets again, and then just go back up here when this is not selected, right click, and then hit OK. Now this is going to send all of the ships you previously selected to combine with that fleet or that task force which is already in the port. So while you're in this mode, once all the ships have actually arrived at the port, you can either just simply zoom out a little bit and click the port or the fleet this way, or if you're in the regular default map mode, just zoom in all the way, select the fleet, and then click merge the selected task force, and now all of your ships are in a single task force. For number 2, what you're going to do is go up here to your production, because pretty much every major starts out producing some ships in the game. You can see everything is selected to auto. What you're going to do is select auto and find 1 or 2 ports that you want your entire navy to start spawning at. Instead of, like, for example, it being auto, they can deploy in any kind of different zone. We might have 1 fleet, for example, or like 3 destroyers spawn down here in Florida, another 3 up near New York, another 3 up here near Washington. It's completely random. So what you could do to stop this is whenever you design a new fleet or ships to be assigned, as the United States, if we're playing in multiplayer in a historical game, we know we're going to fight the Japanese a lot. So you can then select auto and then make all of your ships assign to one specific port. Usually I'll select San Francisco, as that's where I'm going to base the most of the task forces whenever I first start out anyway. So that's all you have to do, and then you can make your task forces over time with your new ships that are being deployed. Now for the third tip, it's kind of a smaller one, but it's still very important. Basically, if you're in single player, whenever it's time to start designing your task forces is based on your navy size. Normally, if you're the United States, UK, Italy, France, usually it's about a year before the start of World War II is whenever you want to start working on your navy, or really any large conflicts if you're in multiplayer, or if you're in single player, usually it's about 3 months. The reason there's such huge amounts of just like difference in dates is because if you're in multiplayer, they're not going to pause the game and let you work on your fleet. Unless it's like 2 or 3 friends or something, they're not going to just let you do that. So giving it about a year in multiplayer would be plenty of time, so you can get distracted, you can make mistakes, you can go back and fix them, you can train your navy, you can do all that stuff, you can select your focuses and all this kind of stuff and still have time to set up your task forces. If you're in single player, you can just simply pause the game about 2 or 3 months before the start of the war and design your task forces then. For number 4, this is probably the most, if not the most important thing to do in Hearts of Iron 4, and nobody ever does it for some reason. When you're getting ready to start designing your task force compositions, you need to think about where your ships are going to fight and what you're going to defend, where you're going to attack, and so on, and design them around those ideas. So for example, if we were playing multiplayer and Japan's a player and he actually owns all of China, we know, okay, he's going to be able to easily probably push into British Malaya. So that, resource-wise, is going to be a huge loss. Now, pretty much all the rubber in the world comes from these zones. So for the United States, it would be incredibly important to protect the Dutch East Indies and British Malaya. So most people would think, okay, I'll just design a fleet around attacking, other ships like destroyers and cruisers and so on. But you're missing a huge thing you can do, which will help out a ridiculous amount. If you have a laptop or a keyboard that has F5 on it, press F5. This puts you in what's called the naval and land terrain map mode system. If you don't have the option to do that, by the way, to get out of it, you press F1. To go into it, you press F5. If you don't have the F1 and F5 keys, you can just simply press it over here, which is naval, I keep wanting to call it naval terrain map mode, so that's mostly what I use it for. You can click it right there, and then to go back to normal, you can just press the little running soldier right there up top. Now, when we're in this mode, you're probably wondering, okay, what does it do? As you can see, there's different highlighted areas, and they have different kinds of highlights on them. So this is just a plain ocean. There's no penalties, no bonuses, or anything. But then if we look down here, you can see capital ships get huge penalties over here into these zones. They have penalties to attack, defense, movement, positioning, but the visibility goes down quite a bit actually, which is very helpful, but their fuel consumption goes up a lot. So we would know capital ships would have a hard time in these zones, so it might be better to just spam destroyers, light cruisers, submarines, and then put only a few amount of capital ships with them because of the penalties and so on associated with these zones. But it's still very important to put capital ships in your fleet. So now it's time to set up your task force. You're going to create it on a few basic ideas. Is the task force going to be for patrolling, convoy raiding, convoy escorting? Is it going to be for a naval invasion support? Is it going to be new or old ships? That's all the kind of things you need to think about when you're getting ready to design a task force. Now, when you're ready to design the task force and you have something in mind, all you would have to do is click this little create a new task force button here. Say, for example, we want to do a little patrol task force. I've got a whole video on my channel, by the way, if you want to look that up, about actual naval composition templates that work all right. But this, for example, is just something I'm throwing together really quick. We'll say 4 light cruisers for AA, and other little screen ships, and then we about 20 destroyers. That would be a decent ship kind of task force for patrolling around in, say, the Atlantic and other zones, or even convoy escort. Now, whenever you're doing this, something very important to remember, this is always the easiest option. Whenever you design your very first task force, you can just select the original one that has all your ships in the same port and just click down here. And that way you can do something later on where anything extra that's in here and something up top gets sunk. If you just have extra stuff left over down here, you don't know what to do with it, it'll go and reinforce the stuff sunk. But while it's down here, you can then select your task force, and you notice there's a plane icon, but there's no planes. What most people will do is they'll go up here to choose insignia. This doesn't do anything what you think. By clicking one of these, it just changes the one to the left of the ship. So what you'll actually have to do is inside of this template here, to the left of the name, you're going to click this button here, and that will change the task force up. So because it would be, say for example, a basic patrol, I would want a, let's say the pitchfork, boom. That's how you would do that. Something else you can do also, if you just have a bunch of extra ships left over when you've made your task forces like I have here, and you're not entirely sure what to do with them, and you don't want to just simply leave them in reserve, you can also just simply do what I've done here. You can select maybe 3 or 4 of the ships, and then just over here, when you know which one of these you want to send them to, just right click. That's all you have to do. Then just select your task force here again. We'll select another 4, send them there. And basically what that's doing over time is it's just replacing those groups and sending more stuff. So now let's talk about organizing your task forces once you've got them all set up. Now, there's a couple easy ways to do this. First off, which is what I prefer to do, you can either set them up like I've done here, whether it's by the sea that they're going to be operating in, or the second option you can do is just set them up by the type of ship group they are. This is probably, in my opinion, one of the most complicated ways to do it, and it's most annoying. Usually the easiest way is to do what I did before and just set them up by the theater that they're going to be operating in, whether it's the Pacific, the Atlantic, coastal, maybe stuff like that, or even set them up in zones like, or something like I've just done here, whether you set them up, let me remove that, or whether it's something like I've done here, where you just have 2 different theaters based on attacking and defense, like the attacking has submarines and the aircraft carrier strike group, while the defense side has things like convoy escort destroyers, it has the patrol group here for escorting the naval invasion support, or even right here, this one for just basic patrols. Things along those lines. It's just all about how easy you want to make it upon yourself. Next up, for the whole thing I was talking about earlier on how to stop port strikes, this is probably 99% of the time what ends up resulting in someone being port striked. If you're, say, the United States, and you're fighting the Japanese over here in the Dutch East Indies, and you're already in the Allies, what's going to end up happening is because you're part of the Allies, your ships are going to end up going to the Dutch East Indies ports to repair. And if it's a Japanese player in multiplayer, they're going to probably know this and be port striking the Dutch East Indies, which is going to cause your ships to just absolutely get wrecked, and you're going to lose them all like nothing ever happened. It's going to be like they were never even built in the first place. So here's how you can avoid that. As the United States, if you're in multiplayer, I usually join the Allies, if it's okay with the host, like 3 or 6 months before the war. If I've joined the Allies, but I have not declared war on the Axis, you can hold control on the bottom left of your keyboard and left click ports. Now what this is doing is it's turning those ports off for repair. Now if you look under here for our production, you'll notice that up here, this is the ships, or the thing. So if we say we want to use a max of our 24 dockyards to repair, which is what that is, this number here is how many dockyards you're using to build ships. This is how many you're allowing the game to use to repair your ships instead of producing new ones. So these would actually, once a ship is done, if there's nothing else being built, then these dockyards are going to repair ships. So whenever you do this, sometimes it will lower the number because it's not allowing you to operate over there anymore. Like over on the West Coast, if we turn that one off, well, actually it's not doing it right now for some reason, but sometimes that will happen. So if you're the United States, Germany, Italy, whoever, make sure you turn off your allies' ports unless they're in very safe zones. So for example, now that we pretend we have pretty much all these ports disabled, the only place where the United States Navy would, well, let's turn Hawaii on. The only place where the United States Navy will actually heal the ships up and they will go and repair them is either the east coast of the United States. Ooh, let me turn off A2 really quick. West coast of the United States, Hawaii, or Alaska. So that's how you can avoid being port striked and just have them go to zones that you know you're not going to have to worry about bombers or anything like that just constantly attacking your ports. Finally, there are 2 last things I want to cover, and that's going to be the end of the video. So let's go ahead and combine, well, we're not going to combine them actually for this. There's 2 options here you can do to make your life a little bit easier. On the right hand side of this little Navy screen where you see all the ships, you'll see this little button. This opens up a task force composition editor. Now, what this will do is it will save your task force and it will try to build new task forces based on the reserves that you get from other fleets. So for example, we're just going to name this Patrol, just like that, okay? We're going to click this little save button here, and now we're going to click OK. Now, our task force, if we move it into there, you don't have to do that. I'm just doing that for the sake of having them together. You can then click Open Task Force Editor, click the drop down, click Patrol, and then click OK. Now it's going to try to send any extra ships that are down here up here to reinforce with this ship. So for example, now because we unpaused for a second, you can see that they left from the old task force and went to the new one. Now, before anybody out there starts trying to mess with this, please remember, in multiplayer, for some reason, it is super broken in multiplayer. You'll have the ships bouncing back and forth. It doesn't really work that well in multiplayer. Also, another thing you can do is if you make your own task force and you're not using this system, you don't do it this way. You just build a task force like I did earlier for these. I just click a create new task force, and then I right click them, you know, just select the anchor or whatever, and select the task force naval, you know, theater. Whenever you do that, the other thing you can do so these ships will stay the same is just click automatic reinforce or enable reinforcement. This will make it to where any ships that are in reserve, like down here, if we were to say lose 2 of the destroyers out of here, well, as long as this reserve fleet is in the same theater, it will take the 2 destroyers out of here and send them to this group right here to replace the 2 destroyers lost in combat. Now, if you also enable the automatic split, it will do the same thing. Something else which is hugely important that people seem to neglect a lot is the engagement rule and the repair priority. Most of the time, I will change this to either low or medium. If it's a large task force, something that I know is going to be important, like holding British Malaya or something, I'll usually put it on medium damage. If it's something like, convoy escorts or destroyers, like these here, I'll usually put them on repair priority low, so they have to be almost sunk before they'll go back and heal because of how important they are. And submarines, I don't really use submarines that much in the Pacific and multiplayer because Japan usually guards their coast pretty well, and I mostly honestly just turn them on never repair and just tell them to just raid the coast as long as they can. Also, one more thing, I did forget to make your lives a little bit easier. Sometimes people have issues whenever they're ordering people to do stuff. Like if, for example, we were to order them to start doing stuff like, try to convoy raid through here for whatever reason. Sometimes they won't actually do that. I don't know why. Sometimes they'll send 4 or 5 groups to one zone and another group to another zone and then leave the rest of them undefended. What you can do here, by the way, you hold shift and right click to get rid of those zones. Whenever you click a task force, select the boat or the task force itself, and then click the mission you want it to do. And what this is doing is it's actually assigning that task force to operate that mission in that zone. So that way, you don't have to worry about them splitting up and trying to do missions in different zones. Don't get me wrong, it works great sometimes, like for naval invasion support or patrolling, but whenever you're trying to convoy raid and stuff, it gets pretty annoying. So that's another thing you can do with that. And then to remove it, you just select the general or the leader and you just right click over here to remove region, and it'll remove all of it. And you can just do it again or just whatever. Anyway, guys, that is pretty much all the tips I have for you guys today about making your Navy a lot easier to operate. Please don't forget to subscribe if this helped you out. Thank you guys so much for watching. I will see you guys next time. Stay awesome.